Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for this talk on annotation of scores. I'll be talking about annotation of 3 different types of scores. But before we proceed to this, I just want to cover the basics of equipment that you need to bring to rehearsals. And they are as follows, these 3 items. Rubber and sharpener are clear goes without saying what they are, but I want to just say a few words about the choice of pencils. I would recommend that you use a pencil that's somewhere between B2 and B4, depending on your preference. That means it's fairly soft and it's clearly visible. You wouldn't have to press down on the page too hard, which means you can also rub it out quite easily. Sometimes if the lighting, for example, if you work in an opera pit, is such that the lighting is attached to the stand, you might find there reflections of the graphite, which then mean that you want to choose a particular strength or softness of the pencil. Anyway, that covers all the basics. And we move on to the 3 main segments, which are your solo and study parts, which you study week in, week out with your teacher or take on master classes. Chamber music scores, which you explore with your colleagues, and then the different challenges of marking up orchestral scores and also different etiquettes when working in an orchestra. When you mark up your solo parts, I would encourage you to write in detail what your ideas are or what instructions you've got, also what interesting imagery maybe has been used in lessons. And I just show you in some more detail how you could mark up fingerings and bowings. There's a custom that the bowings go above the fingerings, which I think is a good one, and that's how I mark up my parts. I would add, and I'm showing you this now, on the using Brahms D minor violin sonata first movement as an example of how I mark up my fingerings. First of all, when I mark up fingerings, I've gotten into the habit that I also make a line up or down depending on whether I shift up or shift down, because it just gives me the confidence as I look through it that I kind of know where I'm heading. And very often when we then perform pieces, we're really just looking for little signs that fly past. So for example, here in this bar, I would be shifting up to 2nd position onto a 2nd finger here, and I would automatically just mark this like that with a little. Then towards the end of the bar, I would be crossing the string. So I would be marking a 3 here. This could still be an up, and if I wanted to be really precise, I would mark a 2 as I'd crossed the string. You could similarly then look at this next bar here, where from the C sharp to the B flat, you have 2 options. You can go across or you can go up. If I were to go across onto a 4th finger, I would just mark a 4. But if I were to go up, I would also mark this. So that gives you different options. You similarly do that when you go down. It is just a preference. Some people don't mark that in that way. I can give you a similar example just to show this when you come to the 2nd subject here, where you then go from the A to the B flat onto a 1, and you do the same again here. And then you mark a 3 here. That's how I mark up my scores for fingerings. Bowings. I'm just going to turn the page and go into the development section. As I mentioned earlier, on the whole, you mark the bowings above the fingerings. That is just a custom, and I don't see any reason not to stick with that. So for example, if you decide for sonata, this gets played with a big grand piano, sometimes you might find you need more bow than is printed in the score. So if you were to change it, so you could, for example, mark, this is just an example, you mark this like this. If you then feel you equally want to separate here, which then, for example, would take this to an up bow, you then would come down to a 2 here and mark a little arrow down. Can you see? You've got the... That's a basic instruction about how to mark up chamber parts or studies. However, we'll just augment on this solo and study parts, that you could also then start writing in interesting thoughts or colors, things that, because learning is a very sensuous, multi-sensory approach to pieces. So rather than just writing soft or loud, when the harmony changes into a sunny thing, you can find the right word you can write in, or if a teacher or in a masterclass a professor has told you a really beautiful imagery that goes with a particular section, it's really worth marking that in the part, because it's surprising what one can forget over the years, and it will stay with you, and in a way as a documentation of your journey with this piece. When it comes to marking up chamber music parts, it's worth remembering that you have become your own teachers. So it's an amazing opportunity to actually bounce ideas off each other and learn how to mark up a part very cohesively. So take time and care over this, and go to the trouble to make sure that you really understand how you want to play a piece and what choices you want to make with bowings or dynamics, and mark these in accordingly, because that is a really important learning process. And by committing it to paper, you in a way make precise decisions. You can then always change them, or you can take them to your professors and get some feedback and learn from that. I know that you all know how to mark up the dynamics. I just want to give you one little tip, because it's very often for us string players to know which part of the bow do we want to do a particular stroke. And for that, I would just say that we have this option, rather than write words, where you could mark this vertical line and then a horizontal line and then a small vertical line down. That would tell you it's at the tip. If you want to say, I'm going to do this in the middle, you go here. If you want to do it at the heel, that's where you would put the little line. That's just a little tip to make sure that the part looks neat. But really enjoy that process, because it will teach you about shaping a piece and all the necessary choices and decisions that need to be done. Well, this brings us to the annotation of orchestral scores, which has different challenges as well as some different etiquettes. In particular, when you think about fingerings. And the reason for that is that fingerings can be personal choice, and sometimes it can be actually off-putting if a colleague that you share the stand with has written a fingering in that you wouldn't want to do. So the best way around that is to negotiate with your desk partner and have a system where you mark you mark fingerings very lightly, and the right-hand player marks it at the top, and the left-hand player marks their fingerings at the bottom. Generally try to not write fingerings in, but sometimes you just need to remind yourself. And it can be sometimes at particularly important moments or exposed moments in a piece where you feel you need the assurance. For example, have a look at this score that I brought, which is the scherzo from the Second Symphony of Rachmaninoff. And in the middle of it, the second violins lead with a furious fugue. And that is a very exposed and important moment in the piece. And because there's quite a lot of chromaticism in it, it's not inherently obvious of what all the fingerings should be. So, for example, if you look at bar 1, you will have to go with the first finger to G here. And some might see that straight away, others want a reminder, particularly at an exposed moment. So if you take the situation, the inside player would like to mark it in, the outside player says, I don't need it, then the inside player could mark it in underneath, very gently, like this. That way it won't disturb the outside player. And I think that goes for all fingerings throughout. Try and, as I said, try and mark in as little as possible. As for bowings and dynamic markings, basically just follow the instructions of the conductor and the principal players. The goal is for all of these be identical in all the parts, because in some ways the creative process of explorative music making and rehearsing comes once the parts have been marked up. So for that, efficiency is also of the essence. In that spirit of collaboration, it's best to share those tasks at the stand. If new bowings or changed bowings come back to the stand, then one can mark them up, the other can make sure that the stand behind knows about it. That way, the whole job of informing an entire string section gets done much faster. And with all that said, equally, as in your chamber music parts and solo parts, there's always little room for creativity still. I myself work at the Royal Opera House, and I yet have to come to the end of a long evening to not find there's a smiley face at the last page turn at the bottom. So there's room to leave your personal mark on the part as well. Anyway, I hope you found this talk helpful, and I hope you have great music making ahead of you. Bye for now.